Have you ever believed something for so long that it quietly shaped the way you saw yourself, even when no one said it out loud? A belief so common that it felt like truth. For many people around the world, there has always been an unspoken assumption about the Philippines. A polite dismissal, a soft judgment hidden behind smiles. The idea that this nation is kind, yes, hard-working, maybe, but not quite exceptional. Not a place that the powerful admire. Not a place that changes the minds of the wealthy, the elite, the people who have already seen everything. You may have felt it before. That moment when someone from abroad speaks slowly to you, as if kindness must replace competence. That casual remark implying Filipinos are good helpers, good followers, but rarely leaders. Over time, these moments pile up until they form a quiet insult that the world seems to agree on. And when everyone seems to believe something, even the strongest people begin to question themselves. What makes this story unsettling is that this belief does not just come from ignorance. It has been repeated in universities, in global forums, even whispered by respected voices. At one point, a well-known Western academic openly suggested that countries like the Philippines lacked the mindset needed for global leadership. The room nodded. No one challenged it. It felt settled, as if the world had already made up its mind. But history has a way of interrupting certainty. Because while these assumptions were being repeated, something very different was happening quietly, away from headlines. Some of the richest and most influential people on earth were arriving in the Philippines with confidence, even arrogance, and leaving with something they did not expect. Not contracts, not applause, but humility. Consider the moment when Jack Ma, a billionaire who built one of the largest empires in modern business, spoke not about profit, but about people. He did not praise Filipino workers for obedience or cheap labor. Instead, he spoke about their creativity, their emotional intelligence, their ability to connect deeply in a digital age that has forgotten how to be human. For a man obsessed with the future, the Philippines reminded him of something ancient and powerful: community. Or think of Pope Francis, a spiritual leader who has stood before kings and presidents, breaking down in front of ordinary Filipinos. Not because of ceremony, but because of faith lived through suffering. He did not speak to them as a poor nation needing guidance. He spoke to them as a people carrying a light the world desperately needs. These moments feel uncomfortable because they reverse the roles we have been taught to accept. The powerful are supposed to teach. The wealthy are supposed to judge. And yet here they were, learning. This story centers on one such man, though his experience reflects many others. He was a self-made investor from Europe, wealthy enough to buy silence, respected enough to be listened to without question. He had spent his life mastering systems, optimizing outcomes, measuring success in numbers that grew year after year. By the time he reached his 60s, he had everything the world promises, and almost nothing that it cannot buy. He did not come to the Philippines searching for inspiration. He came because his advisors told him to: a potential market, a developing economy, a place to observe, not to admire. His expectations were low, almost dismissive. Manila, he thought, would be chaotic, inefficient, temporary. But the first crack in his certainty came not from business, but from a small human moment. A stranger offering help without being asked. A smile that asked for nothing in return. A sense of dignity that did not depend on wealth. It unsettled him. And once a belief begins to crack, it can never fully return to what it was before. What if the Philippines was not behind the world, but ahead of it in ways money can no longer measure? What if the richest people on earth were not praising this nation out of politeness, but because they saw here what their own success could not give them? And what if the real story of the Philippines has never been about what it lacks, but about what it has quietly preserved while the rest of the world was too busy chasing something else? Before the Philippines ever entered his thoughts in a serious way, his life had already begun to narrow, though he did not realize it yet. From the outside, everything looked complete. Wealth had insulated him from most forms of fear. Influence had opened doors that never closed again. But beneath the polished surface, something fragile was forming. A sense that the systems he trusted were no longer working when it mattered most. The first sign came through illness. Not his own at first, but someone he loved deeply. He turned instinctively to the places the world told him were the best. Hospitals in the United States promised cutting-edge treatment, but every interaction felt rushed, clinical, transactional. In Japan, the precision was undeniable, yet the silence felt heavy, almost isolating. In parts of Europe, the care was advanced, but distant, as if compassion had been carefully regulated to avoid inefficiency. Everywhere he went, technology was impressive, but humanity felt oddly absent. As months passed, hope began to thin. He watched doctors speak in perfect language while avoiding eye contact. He watched systems function flawlessly, while people inside them seemed exhausted, detached, already preparing for the next case. It was not neglect, but it was not care in the way his heart needed it to be. And slowly, a question began to haunt him in the quiet moments. When everything is optimized, where does the soul go? At the same time, his faith in education and progress began to crack. He had funded universities, sponsored research, advised governments. He believed deeply in knowledge as salvation. But he saw young people drowning in debt, professors burned out, and institutions more focused on rankings than wisdom. The world he had helped build was efficient, powerful, and deeply tired. By the time the Philippines appeared on his calendar, it felt almost accidental. A suggestion from a colleague, a minor conference, a possible healthcare collaboration in Southeast Asia. He almost declined. In his mind, the Philippines represented the very opposite of what he trusted. Developing, messy, emotional. He assumed it would confirm everything he already believed about why success belonged elsewhere. His first days in Manila felt overwhelming. The traffic was relentless, the noise unfiltered. Nothing moved according to plan. Meetings started late. Schedules bent without apology. To a man who had built his life on control, it felt like failure disguised as culture. He kept his distance, retreating into hotels and private cars, telling himself this was temporary. And yet, something unexpected kept interrupting his frustration. In a small hospital corridor, he noticed a Filipino doctor kneeling briefly before starting a long shift, whispering a prayer not for success, but for strength. In a university classroom, he listened as a professor spoke with fire and conviction, despite outdated equipment and limited funding, teaching not for prestige but for purpose. In a quiet chapel, he saw ordinary people lighting candles, not begging for miracles, but offering gratitude even in uncertainty. These moments confused him. They did not fit into his models. There was no obvious incentive, no visible reward. And yet the sincerity was undeniable. One evening, during a simple dinner, a local partner spoke casually about community support, about neighbors helping pay hospital bills, about faith carrying families through disasters that would have broken wealthier nations. It was said without drama, almost matter of fact. That was when the thought surfaced, uncomfortable and persistent. What if this place, so often underestimated, held something the rest of the world had lost? The Philippines had not solved his problems. Not yet. But for the first time in years, he felt something shift. A faint light, fragile but real. Not the confidence of answers, but the possibility of meaning. And as he prepared to travel south to Cebu for the next part of his visit, a quiet question followed him. What if hope does not arrive through perfection, but through people who refuse to give up on one another? By the time he arrived in Cebu, something inside him had softened, though he would never admit it out loud. He told himself this was still business, still observation, still a temporary detour before returning to the world he understood. Yet the air felt different the moment he stepped outside. Less hurried, less guarded. As if the city breathed at a human pace rather than the mechanical rhythm he was used to. The first real encounter happened in a modest hospital on the edge of the city. No glass towers, no dramatic entrances, just a building worn by time and heavy use. He expected limitations, compromises, excuses. Instead, he was met by nurses who moved with quiet confidence, calling patients by name, touching shoulders gently, listening longer than their schedules allowed. One nurse noticed his hesitation and smiled. Not the practiced smile of customer service, but something warmer, almost familial. She explained procedures patiently, not because he was important, but because understanding mattered. He had seen world-class facilities before. He had never seen this kind of presence. Later that day, he visited a local university, expecting enthusiasm, but not depth. What he found unsettled him even more. In a simple classroom, a professor spoke passionately about ethics, responsibility, and service. The students listened closely, asking questions not about how to get rich, but about how to contribute. Their English was fluent, their thinking sharp, but what struck him most was their sense of purpose. They spoke of family, faith, and nation, as if success meant lifting others, not escaping them. He remembered similar visits to elite institutions in the West, where ambition filled the room like static, restless and loud. Here, ambition existed, but it was anchored, rooted. That evening, he was invited into a family home. No formal reception, no agenda, just food prepared with care and stories shared openly. They asked about his journey, his health, his family. When he tried to deflect, they listened anyway. When he mentioned illness, the room grew quiet, not awkward, respectful. Someone suggested prayer, gently, without pressure. He did not stop them. As voices blended together in soft prayer, he felt something tighten in his chest. Not sadness, recognition. He had spent years surrounded by people who avoided discomfort, who filled silence with distraction. Here, silence was allowed, even honored. What confused him most was the contrast. In places where everything worked perfectly, he had felt alone. In a country that struggled openly, he felt carried. Days passed, and skepticism slowly gave way to trust. He noticed how drivers waved each other through traffic, how strangers shared umbrellas in sudden rain, how laughter surfaced even in difficult conversations. These were not gestures for tourists. They were habits, reflexes shaped by shared hardship and shared faith. One afternoon, walking along the coast as the sun dipped low, he admitted something to himself for the first time. He had been wrong. Not about economics or infrastructure, but about what truly sustains a society. He had assumed wealth created stability. Here, he saw that relationship created resilience. The Philippines did not pretend to be perfect. It did not hide its scars. And maybe that was the point. Where other nations polished their image, this place revealed its heart. As night settled over Cebu, he felt the shift complete. The doubt that once protected him now felt unnecessary. In its place was something quieter and stronger. A sense that healing does not always arrive through systems, but through people who choose compassion again and again, even when it costs them. He did not know yet what this realization would demand of him. He only knew that the Philippines was no longer a stop on his journey. It had become the turning point. What followed was not dramatic in the way movies try to be. There were no grand speeches, no sudden miracles. Instead, the transformation unfolded through ordinary days that carried an unexpected weight. He began waking earlier, not out of discipline, but anticipation. Somewhere along the way, the Philippines had stopped being a place he studied and started becoming a place he lived inside. He spent more time outside meeting rooms and more time among people. In the mornings, he walked past small churches where doors were already open, light spilling onto the street. Inside, people sat quietly, some well-dressed, others clearly struggling, all equal in posture. He did not understand all the words spoken from the altar, but he understood the stillness. It was the kind of stillness that does not come from control, but from trust. In the hospital, he noticed how nurses remembered details no chart could hold. A favorite hymn, a daughter working overseas, a fear never spoken aloud. They did not rush pain out of the room. They stayed with it. One afternoon, he watched a nurse gently guide a trembling hand through a simple prayer, not promising recovery, only presence. Something inside him broke open. He realized that for years, he had confused efficiency with care. Outside the city, he was invited to a small community gathering. Plastic chairs, simple food, children laughing barefoot on uneven ground. There was no performance for him, no effort to impress. When the power briefly went out, no one complained. Someone lit candles. Someone else started singing. Laughter filled the dark. He felt a strange tightness in his throat. The kind that comes when joy appears where it should not logically exist. He began to see the pattern everywhere. Resilience not as a slogan, but as a way of breathing. Faith not as an escape, but as a foundation. Hospitality not as politeness, but as instinct. The Philippines did not deny suffering. It absorbed it, shared it, and somehow transformed it into connection. One evening, during a long conversation with locals who had lost homes to storms and rebuilt them with neighbors, he finally spoke honestly. He admitted how tired he was, how success had left him strangely empty. No one tried to fix him. No advice. No comparisons. They listened. And in that listening, he felt something he had not felt in years. Relief. The realization came quietly, but it was undeniable. He no longer felt like an outsider passing through. He felt held. Not by systems or contracts, but by people who believed that no one should carry life alone. As days turned into weeks, a thought began to surface, one he resisted at first. What if leaving was no longer the obvious choice? What if this place, with all its imperfections, had given him something the rest of the world could not? A sense of belonging that did not depend on status, a reason to slow down, a reason to care again. One night, standing by the sea as the sun disappeared into the water, he whispered words he never expected to say. "I have never seen this anywhere else. Not spoken as praise, but as surrender." The Philippines had not impressed him. It had restored him. And in that moment, he understood something profound. The greatest wealth of this nation wasn't hidden underground or measured in markets. It lived in its people, in their refusal to let hardship harden their hearts. The world may call that weakness. But standing there, surrounded by quiet strength, he knew it was the opposite. For the first time in decades, he felt whole. When the time came for him to consider leaving, the decision no longer felt simple. The world he once rushed back to now felt distant, almost unreal. Airports, boardrooms, schedules, and metrics suddenly seemed smaller than he remembered. The Philippines had not solved every problem in his life, but it had done something far more powerful. It had reminded him why life was worth engaging with in the first place. He noticed the change in himself before anyone else did. He listened more. He spoke less. He found himself thinking not about expansion, but about contribution. Not about legacy carved in buildings or foundations, but about impact measured in people. The illness that once filled his days with fear no longer defined every conversation. Hope had quietly taken its place, not as optimism, but as endurance. One afternoon, sitting with a local doctor who had turned down higher pay abroad to stay close to family and serve his community, he finally understood the deeper lesson. The Philippines did not save him through superiority or spectacle. It saved him through values the modern world often treats as obsolete. Faith that does not disappear under pressure. Kindness that does not wait for recognition. Resilience that does not need applause. He thought back to voices he had heard before coming here. Influential figures who spoke of efficiency, dominance, and control, as if those were the highest virtues. And yet, he remembered how Pope Francis once described the Filipino spirit as a quiet witness to the world. A people who suffer, yet smile. Who lose, yet share. Who fall, yet rise together. At the time, he had admired the words without fully grasping them. Now he lived inside their meaning. This was no longer just his story. He began to see it mirrored in others like him. An American professor who extended his stay to teach one more semester. A foreign patient who chose to continue treatment here because she felt seen, not managed. An investor who shifted focus from extraction to partnership. These were not dramatic headlines. They were quiet decisions made by people who had been changed in ways money could not reverse. The realization settled slowly but firmly. The Philippines did not merely help people survive difficult seasons, it taught them how to live again with dignity and connection. In a world increasingly fractured by division and distrust, this country stood as a reminder that humanity still knows how to care. For Filipinos watching this story, there is something important to hold on to. The greatness of this nation has never depended on external validation. It has lived in homes where faith is passed down like inheritance, in families separated by oceans yet bound by prayer, in communities that rebuild not because it is easy, but because giving up has never been an option. And for those looking in from the outside, the message is just as clear. The Philippines is not defined by what it lacks, but by what it has preserved while others were distracted. A heart for people. A belief that no one stands alone. A resilience that turns suffering into shared strength. As he finally prepared to leave, standing quietly as dawn broke over familiar streets, he felt gratitude instead of regret. The Philippines had not asked him to change. It had simply shown him what was possible when compassion leads and faith endures. In a world searching desperately for meaning, perhaps the richest lesson is this: true wealth is not what you accumulate. It is what restores you. And for many who arrive with power and privilege, it is here, in the Philippines, that they remember how to be human again.